Verses 1 and 2 of chapter 22 we want to think about this evening as we find David in the Cave of Adullam. We read, David therefore departed thence and escaped to the Cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And every one that was in distress, every one that was in debt, every one that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. Napoleon Bonaparte, the French military general and later emperor, was bent on expanding France's borders. And I'm sure you're aware that he was eventually defeated in the Battle of Waterloo. On one occasion, whenever things were getting really difficult for Napoleon, he decided that as a show of strength, he would march through the city of Paris. Whenever things were essentially hanging on in the balance for him. And it was a show of strength, obviously it was the capital city. He was trying to gather up a following. And so as he and his soldiers, all of his soldiers, marched through the city of Paris, there was a lady and she was sweeping the path. And she did something very interesting. She got the broom, she threw it over her shoulder, and she just joined the back of the queue. She was laughed at. And she was asked, well, how on earth do you expect to fight with the soldiers with that broom? And she said this, I don't expect to fight, but I expect to at least show which side I really belong to. And what was that lady doing by that simple act? She was saying, look, well, I pledge allegiance to Napoleon. I am for him. I am all in. I am identifying with him through marching with his army. And throughout the Bible, I'm sure you're quite aware that there are many clarion, crystal clear calls for you to show your true colours and for you to really pin your nail to the mast, for you to really show which side you belong to. You think of Israel as they were dancing before the golden calf, and Moses then came down from the mountain, absolutely disgusted at what he saw. In fact, he was so disgusted, you remember, he took the tables of stone, the 10 commandments that God had given to him, and he smashed them before the people. He was that angry. And in Exodus 32, we then read after doing that, in chapter 26, Moses stood in the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. And we read, all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together unto him. You see Moses there he is, and he's saying to the people, look, who do you really belong to? Which side are you on? Who is on the Lord's side? Again, you think of Joshua. Old Joshua, there he was, almost 110. He had been through the battle, and as he had led the people of God through the land of Canaan, as they had conquered city after city, Jericho, Ai, etc., he then gathers the people together, and in chapter 24 he challenges them to go all out for the Lord, and he leaves them in no doubt as to where he stood. Chapter 24 verse 15, I'm sure the words are familiar to you. Maybe some of you have plaques that say these words in your home. As for me and my house or my family, we will serve the Lord. He was again saying, look, you can do what you want with the Lord, but I know which side I belong to. I'm pledging allegiance to the King of Kings. Now here in these verses, as I've said, we have individuals, and that's what they're really doing. They're pledging allegiance to David. Now we must remember that David wasn't the king at this time. It was King Saul. But if you know anything about the life of King Saul, you'll know that he was a real tyrant of a man. He was a very unstable individual. He was someone who just did what he wanted when he wanted. And David obviously bore the brunt of that. That's why he's on the run. Of course, you remember how he took the javelins and a number of times and tried to kill David. And here were a group of individuals. It describes them as discontented, as distressed. They were distressed with the tyrannical, with really just the sheer lack of ability in Saul. And they come to David. It's beginning to be made known now in Israel that David is the anointed of God. David is the one who will be set apart to replace Saul. As he shows himself as a brave man of war, as he has defeated Goliath already, just a few chapters previously, people are beginning to say, that's the next man. And so in these verses, verse 2, We read that they come to him in the Cave of Adullam as he's there hiding. And we read that he became a captain to them. But you know the interesting thing about it is this. Is what was David at this particular juncture in his life? He was someone who was despised. Someone who was neglected. Someone who was rejected. Rejected by his own family. Not essentially the flavour of the month. Remember when he went to the battlefield, many were mocking him. Look at this young lad, this young upstart, trying to say that we can't take on Goliath. He wasn't exactly liked at this particular time. He was despised, he was a rejected young man. And yet he was the anointed of God. He was the one who was set apart, the one who was chosen. And isn't it interesting here that these individuals, they come from near and from far. They've had enough with King Saul and serving in his army. And they come to David, this young despised lad who was born in Bethlehem. And they say, "You're our captain. We are pledging allegiance to you." And here is a wonderful picture of Jesus Christ. I mean, who was Jesus Christ? Well, he was born in Bethlehem, wasn't he? The very same city, or very same village rather, of David. He was David's greater son. He was the Messiah. He was the chosen of God. And yet the Bible tells us in Mark's Gospel that he came unto his own, and his own received him not. Isaiah 53 was despised and rejected. We esteemed him not. A man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. My David was acquainted with grief as he was on the run from the king that he loved, the king that he wouldn't lay his hand on. And so tonight the challenge very simply is this, is that as well as Jesus Christ wearing the crown as king, you are to crown him as your king. So who's your king this evening? Do you belong to Jesus Christ? Do you belong to the one who was set aside of men, who died an atoning death for your sins? Or perhaps tonight still finds you on the other side, serving a ruinous king, Satan himself, belonging to him, pledging allegiance to the king. Let's think about this evening. Time's rushing on. The setting of this pledge. Where was this pledge? Where did they pledge allegiance to the king? Well, we read in verse 1 that David departed thence and escaped to the Cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. Now this place, Adullam, the name Adullam, it's used a number of times in the Old Testament. It was a city that was southwest of Jerusalem and was actually further south, about 13 miles further south of the town or the city of Bethlehem, close to Bethlehem, close to where David lived. Now it was used a number of times in the Bible. That the first time it appears is in Genesis 38, where you read of a certain Adullamite. And so this shows you that even in Joseph's day, this city Adullam, this place named Adullam, that it existed. Now many believe that obviously this cave that David came to was obviously next to the area or the city named Adullam. And whenever you read about it, it seems that there was a multiplicity of caves just outside the city Adullam, or the town, the area Adullam. Albert Barnes describes the area this way: innumerable caverns, one nearly 100 foot long, are excavated in the soft limestone hills in the neighbourhood of Beit Jabrin. So David's on the run from King Saul. He's running south from Jerusalem. And so what does he do? Well, he goes to a well-known area where he knows he's going to find shelter. Remember, as I've said, this was just miles from Bethlehem, where he was born, where he was reared, where he would have often taken the sheep as they would find pasture on the hills, etc. I'm surmising to you that this area was known very, very well to little David as he was raising the sheep on the hills. And I think this is evidenced even in the detail in verse 1. Just think about this, what it says. When his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. So word gets out that David's on the run from Saul, and he's hiding somewhere in that cave system just outside Adullam. And his own brothers hear it. His own brothers. Those who despised him, those who rejected him. So I'm showing you that as soon as they hear that David's on the run, they know exactly where he's going to go. That place where he would have spent much perhaps of his childhood. The name Adullam itself is interesting. It comes really from a Hebrew verb which means just or righteous. But also in this name Adullam, there's a noun which means people. And when you put it together, what the name Adullam means is this: a just or a righteous people. A just or a righteous people. Now what was it? It was a place of safety. It was a refuge for those for David here as he's on the run. It's a refuge for those who are distressed, those who are discouraged in days where Saul is just a major disappointment. If you've ever been to Belfast and you're on the M2, as you're about to go up the incline there and head for Glengormley, you look to the left, you see Cave Hill. And you see two caves, one just at ground level, one just a little bit above it. My father was reared not too far from there, and so I know all about it, and I've been there. But that's kind of the idea, although on a much larger scale. Cave system, just conclaved out of the rock. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see, I'm sure, for those who have been in Israel. And these scriptures even back up just how beautiful it was. In Micah 1 verse 15, we also read this: "He shall come to Adullam, the glory of Israel." So as a place of safety, a place of security, shelter for David, it's described as glorious in Micah. You put all of this together. Its name means just or righteous people. What you have in these people as they're fleeing to David in the Cave of Adullam, that little lad who was despised and rejected and who was reared in Bethlehem. As they're fleeing there for refuge, as they're coming there with all of their problems and all of their discontentedness and all of their debts, etc. As they're coming to this place of safety but place of beauty, you see Jesus Christ. You see, in this place called Adullam, you really have a picture of the gospel. And if you're not saved this evening, let me make it abundantly clear that you belong to a king or a prince I should say, just like Saul. Just like King Saul. Saul was a bloodthirsty man. He wanted David dead. He wanted the anointed of God dead, exterminated. What else was Saul? He was a tyrannical man. He was a disappointment to all of his followers. And if you're outside of Christ this evening, you belong to the greater than Saul. You belong to the prince of the power of the air. You belong to Satan. Satan's bloodthirsty. What do I mean by that? Luke 22 verse 31. Peter, he desires to have you, that he'll sift you as wheat. He wanted to destroy Peter, that's what it means. And child of God, or my friend, he wants to destroy your life this evening. He wants to destroy you. So that's what Satan's bid is. Satan, he bids to destroy you. And yet, if you're outside of Christ, that's who you belong to. And so what do I say to you this evening? I say very simply, as was said to Lot in Genesis there, escape for thy life to the hills. Run to Jesus Christ. Run to the one who is prefigured here in Adullam. Run to the one who is your refuge, who is your safety, the one who makes you just and righteous. What does Jesus Christ do in his perfect life? He covers you by his righteousness. That's why so often David calls the Lord in the Psalms his rock, his refuge, his safety. So many times. Just one, for example, Psalm 71 verse 3. This is David. Be thou my strong habitation, whereunto I may continually resort. Thou art my rock and my fortress. What does David say the Lord was to him? He was his covering, he was his righteousness, he was his rock. He was just like the cave of Adullam was to these men. And so flee to the one who covers you, who protects you, who shelters you, just as this Adullam was in the natural realm for all of these followers of David, as we read there that they gathered themselves unto him. Gather yourself unto Christ. As I was thinking about that this week, I thought of the story. I couldn't help but think of the story of Corrie ten Boom. The little Dutch girl who hid Jews from the Nazis in her house. Her father lived in Holland. Her father made watches, and they had a little room, and they hid Jews in it for a time. Of course, you probably are aware, she herself was thrown into a prison camp. And on one occasion, she was praying, pouring out her heart and her soul out to the Lord, and she saw a little crack in the wall. And the little ant just went into the crack in the wall. And as she was praying, the words of Psalm 32 came to her heart. Verse 7, "Thou art my hiding place." And I think there's books and even films all about her life, the hiding place. As she thought about that little ant in the safety and shelter of that crack in the wall, she reminded herself that the Lord was her hiding place. The Lord was her Adullam. The Lord was her fortress. The site of this pledge, the Cave of Adullam. Think with me, secondly, and we will be quicker with this, the supporters behind this pledge. The supporters behind this pledge, and we read of them in verse 2. Who was it that made this pledge? Verse 2, everyone that was in distress, everyone that was in debt, everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves to him. He became a captain over them. I can't get over just who was here. Verse 1, his brethren, all his father's house heard of it. You remember when Samuel went down to that little house, that little shack probably in Bethlehem, and was on the lookout for the next king. And there's Jesse, and he parades all of David's brothers. Not one of them is the Lord's anointed. And 1 Samuel 16 verse 11, you then read of Jesse just sort of suggesting David, but he's out there in the fields, so don't really worry about him. He was despised by his family. In 1 Samuel 17 verse 28, his brothers accused him as he went down with corn and cheese to the battlefield there. His brothers accused him of just being there for wanting to be seen. These same individuals that despised him, that treated him with contempt, verse 1 tells us his father's house. In other words, his brothers. His father's family. They're here. It says there's 400 other men, verse 2. These were probably soldiers or men of renown, men of skill. And yet we also read here that in verse 2, the distressed were there. Everyone that was in distress. The idea is under pressure. It means straitened. It has the idea of those who are under the stress or hardship of probably the rule of King Saul. Because of how he is behaving, that affects the individuals in the land. It mentions the debtors, everyone that were in distress and everyone that was in debt. In other words, individuals who owe money to people, but who couldn't even make ends meet and pay their bills. Discontented as well were there. Distress, dead, and discontented, verse 2. It has the idea of being in bitterness, of feeling wronged, of feeling mistreated. Here are individuals who, as we would say, are just fed up with King Saul. They're discontented. They feel burdened, they feel the hardship of it, and perhaps even because of changes that he's making in the land that is causing them to struggle to pay for their bills. And even David's own family are there. Soldiers are here. And in this group you have a picture of those who come to Jesus Christ, the anointed, the chosen of God, the greater Son of David. I want to ask you this evening, has the world left you feeling distressed? Just like these individuals, everyone that was in distress. Sometimes being under the rulership of Satan can leave you feeling burdened, pressed down. Maybe tonight finds you discontented. Discontented with the world. You will find this discontented. Satan promises much, but he always pays little. And individuals, they give themselves, maybe this is you this evening, giving yourself to pleasure, giving yourself to the way of the world, the whims of Satan, and it promises so much and it looks so glamorous. But what you end up feeling is discontented, mistreated, used and abused. When you think about all who are born into this world, we're born in debt, not in the red financially, but spiritually, because God demands perfect righteousness to enter into heaven. And when you do not have that because of sin, you are in debt to Him. He even described those who belong to Satan in Revelation 14. This is how they're described, verse 11. They have no rest day or night. Day or night. And perhaps that's you this evening. Days go by, nights go by, and you just have no rest. What does Christ say to you? He simply says this to you this evening: make me your captain, pledge allegiance to me, or to use the language of Matthew 11, 28, 29 and 30. Come unto me, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for my burden is easy, my yoke is light. Ye will find rest for your weary sin-sick souls. Come to me, make me your captain, pledge allegiance to me, and I will give you rest. I will free you from this debt. I will provide a righteousness for you. I will cover you from all of your sin. As Henry Martin, the missionary to Iran, put it, my soul, amidst the uneasiness in this outward world, it finds itself driven to take refuge in God. And all of the stresses and debts and discontents of life, I trust, are driving you to seek refuge in the one who is the Adullam for your soul. He is the refuge, the safety, the sight, the supporters. Lastly and quickly, think with me about the strength as a result of this pledge. Everyone that was in distress, verse 2, in debt, discontented, gathered themselves to him. He became a captain over them. He didn't become their king. His crowning day was coming, but he became their captain. But as I've said, remember, there would come a day when King Saul would be set aside. David would be crowned king. People would exclaim, long live the king. His crowning day was coming, but they made him their captain. Now what happened to this bunch? This bunch of those who were in debt, this bunch who were fed up, distressed, who were discontented. What happened to them? Do we read of them again in the Bible? And this, I trust, will blow your mind. I'm sure you have heard of David's mighty men. 2 Samuel chapter 23. There you have a list of men who are described as David's valiant, mighty men. This is what this bunch of men became. David's mighty men. Individuals who were remembered for their exploits and their loyalty to King David. In other words, when he became a captain over them, he transformed their lives. He gave them strength for the battle. He helped them as they fought for him, as they were loyal to him, and they became mighty men. What a description of this bunch as we come to a close. They're in debt, they're distressed, they hated David, but they become David's mighty men. What type of men were they? Well, look, I'll not show you all of them, but in 2 Samuel 23, verse 8, we read the first one in the list. Just listen to this. 2 Samuel 23, verse 8. Adino the Eznite, he lifted up his spear against 800, whom he slew one at a time. The first mighty man named in that list was probably here in the Cave of Adullam. How is he remembered? He takes his spear up and he slays 800, and he slays them one at a time. He took on 800 of the enemy all by himself, and he slew them one at a time. See, God delights in this, in taking the distressed and making them daring, making them bold and loyal and true servants of his. You say tonight to the Lord, I haven't the strength. But when you come and you make Jesus Christ your captain, and you make him and you pledge allegiance to him, you make him your king. He'll give you strength not just to take on one enemy, but as the enemies come one by one, he'll give you the grace like Adino the Eznite to take them all on one at a time. In other words, as you face the giants, as you face the enemies, as they come one by one, God will give you the strength to face them all. Now, I trust you'll pledge allegiance to him. John Piper, not a man who would often quote, but he said this. He said, God is not an employer looking for employees. He is an eagle looking for people who will take refuge under his wings. There's an awful lot of John Piper that I don't agree with, but I tell you what, that is a lovely way of summing up those who come to Christ. They take refuge under the wings of Jesus Christ, their captain. So who's your captain? Who's your king this evening? I trust that you'll be able to say, like David, as he would later say as he came to the end of his life in 2 Samuel 22, verse 3, "In him will I trust. He is my shield, my salvation, my high tower, my refuge, my Saviour." I trust you'll leave saying that concerning Christ this evening. Let's just pray and commit our time, commit the Word of God